Good morning, everyone. This is Roy Luebke with GENEDGE, and I appreciate you all joining us for this fourth presentation in the series. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about risk management and how to improve your security posture and prioritize the mitigation efforts for your business. I have a guest speaker with us today. I have Ms. Baan Alsinawi, who is the president and founder of cybersecurity firm TalaTek here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. The guest speakers that I have on the presentation are all local businesses. They're focused on giving a lot of attention to Virginia companies, and I'm trying to link both the Virginia firms on the client side and on the technical side to kind of do a little bit of matchmaking here. So I'm going to do a couple of minute overview, and then I'm going to turn over to Baan and let her present her views on risk management. So first of all, just a real quick commercial here. Who is a GENEDGE? What is a GENEDGE? Why are we presenting to you folks? We are the manufacturing extension program of state government for the Commonwealth of Virginia. So we are actually a state entity, agency, if you will. We are also part of the U.S. Department of Commerce, NIST organization across the country. There are between 50 and 60 centers around the country, and GENEDGE is the Virginia version of that. And we happen to be owned by the state of Virginia. And we've been around doing this a long time. We focus on manufacturing, industrial, and research and development organizations. So what do we do? GENEDGE is in the business of helping companies to visualize a new future and to expand their strategy, to help with operational issues in terms of making the business more effective and more efficient, and then helping to commercialize offerings, to be able to help to find new opportunity spaces and how to communicate your value propositions and how to make your business expand, ultimately to be able to grow, be more profitable, and add more staff to the business. So with that, that's my quick commercial. So I just want to start out just a couple of high-level things. First of all, what are we talking about when we're talking about cybersecurity? We are talking about 5 basic things when we're talking about in this electronic world. What we're looking at doing is providing confidentiality to the users and the data, integrity of the data, availability of your systems and of the data itself, being able to prove who you are and that you are actually the person executing a transaction. That's what non-repudiation is referring to. And then authentication, making sure that the right people have access to the right things. So at a very high level, that's what cybersecurity is focused on. Now today, you know, we're hearing a lot about attacks and all these kinds of things, and that's what people are equating security to. Those are attacks against these 5 areas. It's people that are trying to break those controls in those 5 areas. Security itself is a number of things. If you're on the conference call, if you can mute your conference call button, that would be great. Appreciate it. Security is a combination of things, right? It's policies in terms of how your business is looking at cybersecurity. It's procedures that you are implementing to ensure your security. It's the application of technology, tools, and methods of being able to protect and defend and mitigate damage. And then finally, it's the behavior of your people. And that's the most critical part of this whole thing, is because we as users do all kinds of things on our computers and using the internet and accessing other sites that introduce risk into this whole equation. The more we use it in the less structured way, the more damage that we're exposing our company to. So, very high level, what is it? Well, what we're talking about with risk. What is risk? Risk is just a combination of probabilities and outcomes. So, probability that your system at some point in time is going to be attacked is 100%. And in fact, you probably have already had some sort of a nefarious thing go on, or you have already had something running on your systems that you're not even aware of, because a lot of things don't necessarily try to take your system down as much as maybe they're monitoring your system, they're monitoring your activity and your transactions, and they're trying to find patterns in who you are connecting to, because as a small business, they might not be wanting to hold you ransom or destroy your system. But what they're doing is they're looking for links to larger organizations and other entities that they can take advantage of. You're looking at outcomes. What is going to happen when the bad thing happens? So what is the outcome that the bad guy is after? And then finally the question is, what's the impact on your business? So when you look at the systems and when you consider what Baan is going to talk about here, think about probability, outcome, and impact. And you prioritize the things in that order in terms of how you are going to spend money to be able to increase the security posture of your business. Now, I'm not going to go through all of this. This is a framework for risk management, and this is what we do when we work with our clients in this area, is to go through these 6 different steps to be able to say, what assets are you trying to protect? How are you protecting your systems? How are you executing and implementing those controls? How are you assessing the controls? How are you authorizing your information system? And then what are you doing to validate that those things are in fact making your system more secure? I've just put this in here for later use. We will send all of the participants this slide deck at the end. We'll also have a link that we send to you where we make this presentation audio available as well. So I put this in here just as a reference page for you guys to understand a little bit more about that previous slide, but I don't want to get into those details. So at this point, what I'm going to do is turn it over to our guest speaker. I'll let her introduce her business and talk with us a little bit more about cyber risk management. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead, Baan, and make you the presenter. You should be able to unmute your phone and your computer be able to speak. So I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to you.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Make sure you guys can see my slides.
Yeah, I can.
Okay, excellent. Good morning, everybody. As Roy alluded, TalaTek is one of the companies, the small companies and women-owned small companies in Virginia that are working with GENEDGE. We're very pleased and excited about the chance to work with GENEDGE and to be able to communicate with the other businesses in the Virginia space. Our firm is focused on risk management and cybersecurity, and Roy reached out to us and asked if we could speak to that topic in some level of detail. So we'll pretty much take it from where Roy left as far as what do we mean when we speak about risk management, what is the framework, and what are we trying to protect. And hopefully at the end of our presentation, we would give you some ideas about where to begin and how to approach the challenge of managing risk in your environment. I am making sure here. This is about me, so we'll skip that. We'll speak about why integrated risk management, why is it important, how to implement integrated risk management, where do you start, and we'll have some time for questions and answers. We will spend maybe 30 minutes on this deck, so hopefully you'll have time to ask questions at the end. So as Roy spoke about, there are several areas of that related to your business that are very critical for you to protect, and essentially we will be speaking to these as far as integrity, availability, confidentiality, and what does that mean for small businesses, especially in this area. This slide is just a very high-level definition. We'll break it down into each piece. We'll speak to that in much more detail. But in essence, the approach for integrated risk management is a set of practices and processes that are supported by a risk-aware culture. We'll talk a lot more about what does that mean. The enabling technologies, the tools that you use are all a means to your objective, which is to protect your business, to allow you to make risk-based decisions, and to perform in a way that manages your business. So it's a means to an objective. We will talk a lot about the culture and who gets to set the tone and the decision-making as far as what are the security risks in your environment.
Could you move your slide, please?
So the areas we'll talk about, why integrated risk management. A lot of the talk we hear about every day about businesses that are being, I'm sorry, is that me, Echo, or somebody else?
No. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
What are the drivers for integrated risk management? Aside from, we hear every day in the news about high-profile security hacks and compromises that are taking place. Everywhere from our credit cards being compromised and receiving these letters that promise us a credit secure monitoring to the very high-profile last summer election impact on our election system and on the political parties. So clearly this is something that's consuming us as citizens and as business owners especially. We need to see what can we do to protect ourselves. One of the main drivers are regulations and the requirements for contracts, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. A lot of us have, if you are a healthcare provider, you might have HIPAA requirements. If you're providing services to the government, there are DFARS requirements that requires you to be in compliance and demonstrating that you are, in fact, protecting the data. So aside from it being a good practice, which is due diligence is good business, and we'll speak about why you would want to do integrated risk management to, even without the regulations, it is a good thing to do, and what is the impact on your bottom line, essentially. Another driver for why would you care is that your small businesses are pretty much cyber targets. They're presumed not to have a lot of security investments, not heavily invested in protections and prevention. They don't have risk management programs. So a lot of statistics out there in the industry will tell us that TalaTek is a small business, so I can attest to the fact that we are targets, and we, if you're monitoring your systems, you will see that, as Roy very well stated, that 100% of the systems are being targeted. As a matter of fact, years ago, when I was more of a technical person, we would put a unpatched system on the internet without any firewall, without any protections. And we had a timeline, which is within 20 minutes, the system will be hacked and somebody will own it. I'm guessing that probably the timeline has been much shorter than 20 minutes at this point. But it is a fact that somebody out there is trying to find holes and weaknesses in every system out there on the internet, and they will exploit it where they can. So that's the driver for why you would care. It's important to align the risk and compliance. We'll talk a lot about that. Managing security and risk is not done in a vacuum. You really want to align the practices vis-a-vis risk management with your bottom line and your business objectives. Once you do that, I believe it will be a lot more in sync with your operations, with your stakeholders, and instead of it being some different siloed effort to meet a compliance requirement in a vacuum, and we'll definitely speak to that. And of course, protecting your reputation. We'll talk again. Those of us who have, we're small businesses, we cannot afford perhaps a downtime or a hack in our security or losing our customers' data. These could be detrimental to our business. And there are other statistics we will refer to that, in fact, a lot of businesses, it's a high percentage, I'm sorry, I don't remember the number, but a high percentage of small businesses don't even survive the cyber attacks. They essentially, it is detrimental to the bottom line. So these are the drivers and why. Roy showed you a framework, which is the NIST, basically risk management framework. This is another cybersecurity framework, is also developed by NIST in the past couple of years in response to an executive order by the previous administration. All these frameworks are really just a roadmap, if you will, or a cookbook for how to. What should you do? What are the steps you need to take in order to protect your most critical element, really, in your business is your data. If we think about it, it's still all the cybersecurity measures, all the tools that we need to use. In essence, at the end of the day, what you're trying to protect is your critical assets, which is your data. If you're a startup and you have a new software solution, that's your intellectual capital, and you're really concerned with it not being compromised and lost in any way. If you're a health provider, you clearly do not want to compromise the PII data for your clients. And so on and so forth. The examples are endless. Anybody who manages and processes credit cards, etc. Excuse me. So the bottom line is there are a lot of frameworks out there in the industry, and this is one we're going to use to speak to, but in essence, if you really look at it, they are all pretty much trying to achieve the same goal. How do you manage your risk? And it's easier if you break it into defined steps. That way you can say, okay, so I have to, we'll talk about every one of these separately. So another thing before we dive into what is it to identify and protect and respond and all that, we wanted to talk conceptually as well at a high level. When a business approaches a risk management and they're thinking about it or they are already implementing it, it is not a point-in-time process. It's really a continuous process that needs to be ongoing at all times. It never ends, really, in essence, and it has to be integrated truly into all your business practices. Let's say your HR, your finance, your legal, your operations, your IT. Security is not, if you think about it as a siloed effort only concerned with the IT group and IT assets, you're probably missing the big picture. In order for it to be effective and successful, it has to be integrated in all your business aspects, and it has to be ongoing in a finite loop, as you see in the diagram. So what are the how-tos of integrated risk management? We imagine that most of us are resembling this individual here, looking at it, not knowing where to start, or if you're halfway through it, you're not sure how successful you are, what are the next steps. We'll speak in details about these areas here. One, you need to define your organization's risk appetite. This seems very academic, but in essence, it is really the core function that your organization should spend time and energy on, because any security tools that you invest in, any security processes, measures, need to be geared towards what is your risk appetite. And in essence, what that means, each business has a different appetite for different types of risk. So you would look at, again, let's take the example of a healthcare provider. Their most concern is not to lose the privacy data of their clients. This is definitely, they have HIPAA requirements. They have a reputation to protect. There are fines that are levied upon businesses that do not meet the HIPAA requirements. If you are, in fact, subject to an incident where data has been lost, you probably have to invest in a credit monitoring for all the clients that have been impacted. There are a lot of things that result from lack of protection of your data. So in that example, your risk appetite for loss of privacy data is pretty low. You really want to protect that element of it. in which case you look at a couple of areas in your business. Maybe your HR system not being available all the time or being down for 2 days, you're okay with that. So your appetite for that, for tolerating that type of risk is higher than your appetite for losing your data. So in essence, the exercise we'll go through as an example is to make a list of all the areas that really you think will affect your bottom line, will affect your reputation, will affect your operation. And then you may want to put a number next to that and say, well, this is my top priority. This is something I cannot absolutely not tolerate any risk in that area, while at the same time looking at the others and making informed decisions about what do you care about most. Once you go through that exercise, you'll be able to look at the plethora of risks in your environment. You know, you have employees. Well, do you have proper measures for, let's say, they take the laptops home and they work from home? Do you have proper procedures for protecting that data? Do you have well-written rules of behavior that makes your employees and contractors aware of what happens if they lose or compromise your corporate information? If they send their data to their personal email, to their Hotmail or Gmail, do you have a policy to make sure they are aware they can't do that? Do you have tools in place to prevent that from happening even if they try? So once you have the big picture, you can make sure that you're aware of your risks and then make informed decisions based on that. And then your focused investments. We'll talk again some more about that. It's no different than an insurance policy. If you have an old car, then your insurance policy can't be too high, but if you have a really expensive, fancy car, then your insurance policy needs to be higher. So the moral of the story is if you know what you can and cannot tolerate as far as risks, if you have a list of all your risks, then you can make sure that you know where your money is well spent. You don't want to spend too much on things that are not a high risk for you, and we'll talk again about what your risk choices are as far as managing the different areas. And the goal ultimately is to achieve compliance and your security goals. And these are all in context of what does your business do? What do you care about? You're a manufacturing firm? Okay. Where are the risk areas as far as you're concerned? The Internet of Things, all your equipment have IP addresses and they're hackable in one way or form. Do you know where those are? Stuff like that. So I already talked a little bit about this, but the point is, as we looked at, remember the framework slide which speaks to, okay, identify your risk. This is the first step. Before you even decide, okay, I'm going to spend $100,000 or $5,000, you really need to start with that exercise. The management team, the board of directors, however whoever the stakeholders are, it's a worthwhile exercise to decide what are your risks, and if you handle medical data, it will be a different risk than if you are an HR firm that handles employee data. Do you have policies as far as your laptops and working from home? Do you have encryption on these laptops? Do you know if what type of encryption it is? Some of these encryption algorithms get outdated and you need to update them. Are you always up to speed on that? Do you know what tools are you using? One of the areas of risk could be that you are an e-commerce business and then you need your website to be available 24/7, then having an outage is effective to your your bottom line, then perhaps you need to make sure that you have redundancy and high availability and that your site is always up. That way you can continue to do your business. And another risk area is outsourcing. A lot of us, especially small business, we outsource our HR, our bookkeeping, legal. We all focus on our core business areas, and we're outsourcing a lot of our corporate structure to other businesses. Are we sure that these partners that we're relying on, are they doing their fair share of protecting your data? I have my employee data on an HR site. I really care that they are protecting this information, and anything that happens to them will expose me. So what are the legal paperwork? Do you know, have you discussed with your lawyer what type of terms you need to put in your legal agreements with your employees, with your contractors, and with your partners? These are risk areas that you could consider. And then identifying your risk tolerance. What can you accept and to what degree? For every risk that you identify, you could put a number next to it, if you will. It's a very simple example that we use here is that your website. You're in e-commerce and your website being up is critical. It affects your bottom line. Your sales are affected if you're not available. So you then go in and say, okay, what can I tolerate? If you absolutely need to have your website 24/7, then that's a high risk, and then you essentially devote or dedicate enough funds and resources to make sure that that doesn't happen. And that could be a team of experts. It could be a redundant site across the country so that if something happens in Virginia, then your site in California is available. But if your website is, being out for 12 hours is fine, then that's a low risk and you're willing to tolerate it, and so on and so forth. So for every risk, you need to come up with some range that you think, okay, this is a high risk, this is a low risk, this is a moderate risk. It helps with making investment decisions, really, at the end of the day. The next step, the next thing we think is very critical as well for managing your risk and implementing a risk management program is identifying all the stakeholders and who has to do what. The term of the RACI, which is who's responsible, who's accountable, and who's consulted, and who's informed. This is one simple example. We speak to handling corporate laptops. So all the employees and contractors get a laptop. That laptop is encrypted. Somebody has to make that decision. Maybe not. Maybe nobody works except in the office on the enterprise workstations, and when they go home, they don't have access to any of the corporate data. Somebody is responsible for making that policy that is aligned with your business practices, and that usually are the decision makers. Always the top-down approach. Whoever is the CIO, COO, president, whoever is the top team, those are the folks who are responsible for making sure you have adequate policies in place that are effective for your own business. Those people are not the same people who will implement the policy. So you have people who are accountable. Those are the folks who actually, once you decide what is your policy vis-a-vis the laptops, then you have other folks who are the ones who will implement that. So if you decide that you will give everybody a laptop and that laptop needs to be encrypted, then you have IT folks who will actually decide what type of laptop, what type of encryption, how to manage the keys for this encryption, how to track the assets, so on and so forth. There's a whole lot of things that go around managing that simple task, if you will, around corporate laptops. And then you have people that you need to consult. If you decide to purchase a laptop for every person in your organization, you need to speak to the budget folks and make sure that you do have the resources, and you make decisions about how often do you refresh these laptops. Technology changes very rapidly, maybe every 2 years, maybe not. Again, those folks could have input into the decision-making that's very useful, and then they are engaged, and that may get a lot of better buy-in from all the resources there. And, of course, you have to inform those impacted by this policy. So if we go back for all the list of risks that you've identified, you decide what your appetite is, and then you engage all the stakeholders. Back to the concept of it's not only an IT problem and it's not only management problem, it's everybody in the organization needs to be engaged in that. Identifying the gaps is the next logical step. You decide that you need to have your website needs to be up 24/7, and that's important for you. Okay, well, you only have one site, and chances are the server will be down, perhaps. There is a likelihood that this will happen. So that is a gap in meeting your business objectives. You are a medical firm. You handle privacy data, but you really haven't implemented any encryption for your data on your servers. Well, that's a gap in meeting a requirement, not only a regulatory requirement, but also something that impacts your reputation and potentially causes you money as far as fines or like we brought up the example of credit monitoring. So you need to have an awareness of where the gaps are. Here's my business goals. Here are my existing as-is status. This is how I look like today. And here's where I want to get to, and what's the gap between where I want to get to and where I am today. And truly, I believe that, and this is not me, but essentially, if you don't know where your risks are, then you're very exposed because you really don't know where to put your money in, and you're not going to make informed decisions about that, and you only have finite resources that you need to be smart about where to dedicate what you're doing. So once you've made a list of your risks, you've quantified that in some fashion as far as, you know, where your risk tolerance is, and you've defined your gaps, then you have decisions to make as far as the risk. You want to make informed decisions that are in line with your business finances and resources. You might decide to accept a kind of risk. Let's say your website needs to be up 24/7, and you only have one site and you're worried about downtime and its impact. But you look at the bottom line and the dollars and you decide, you know what, I'm going to have to accept that for this year because I don't have enough money to stand up another site within the next 12 months. You make a decision that you will accept that risk for the time being and revisit that next year when you think you have more funds to actually have a second website somewhere else. These are all decisions that are based on your funding, your resources, your budget, and how does that affect your business. We'll talk about insurance policies. You could purchase an insurance policy. You know, you work in the tech industry and you hire contractors and you work with other businesses to augment your existing team. Then you need to have some sort of errors and omission policy, and it needs to be commensurate with the risk that you anticipate that could happen. The insurance policy, in essence, is a way to reduce or transfer the risk. You know it might happen. You're not sure. You can mitigate it because you don't have the resources to do that, so then your insurance policy becomes the means for you to transfer that risk. Again, we're going through this whole life cycle in the framework for the cybersecurity framework. It talks about how to identify, we went through that, and how to make a decision about what to do about risk. One critical element of managing risk is the protection. What should you invest in as far as preventing and as far as protecting your data and protecting your assets? Like we said, you need to know where your data is. Do you have 500 servers or do you have 5 servers? Where are they located? Which server has your, I don't know, your client data? Which one has your finance data? It is really critical to know what your asset is. It is a true statement that in a lot of cases when we meet with clients, they really don't have a good grasp on what their, where their assets are and where the data is, and which means they can't make really well-designed decisions that are informed based on where the risk is highest. So it's critical for you to know where the data is. And we've found, and our recommendation will highly be, is to focus on some controls. So, you know, you can't do everything all at once. Secure access, Roy referred to that. That's critical. Having good password policy goes a long way to protect you. Relatively low investment. It's simply a policy that says you have to have 13 characters, complicated password with, you know, not just dictionary words, and that password needs to be renewed every 45 days, and you need a 2-factor authentication. These are relatively low investment tickets, but they go a long way in protecting your data, and they're well worth it. Just to use an example, a few years ago, if anybody remembers the Target store hack that took place where credit cards were stolen. I was one of the ones who received the letter that says your credit card data was stolen. This happened because a partner of Target did not use a 2-factor. They were just using a username and password, and then through the partner, the hackers were able to get through them to Target and then steal the data. So then This is one case in point of having a really strong, secure and access method goes a long way in protecting you. Awareness training, it's a lot of industry studies and statistics shows that that's another relatively low budget ticket item, but it goes a long way if you make your employees, your contractors aware of what to avoid. It is, you know, if we speak about the DNC hack, at least what was reported is that a fake Gmail request went to somebody who clicked on it and then actually provided their credentials that way. Well, security awareness would have gone a long way to preventing that from happening. Most of the risks in the environment are because users click on fake emails and spam, phishing, or go to websites and download insecure data links, click on something that they shouldn't. So awareness training is something that we highly recommend that you invest in and make sure that it happens on a recurring basis, and make sure that people, I think repeating in this case will be very useful for people not to forget. And then implementing layered defense. This goes without saying. All of us need to have firewalls, intrusion prevention. We need to have antivirus on our desktop. There are low-key, there's affordable measures. There's a lot in the industry that is available, and folks need to use it. And the concept of if one layer of defense was compromised, then you have another layer that will protect you and prevent that from happening, and essentially lowering your prevention methods that will protect your data. Roy, how am I doing on time? Sorry, before I keep on going here. I think we have...
We're doing good. We're got about 10 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes.
Okay, great. As far as detection, that's another step in the framework for you to manage your risk. So you put in the prevention methods, and then you sit back and you think that you're doing great. I have a firewall, I have an antivirus, I'm doing great. Really, you need to have measures in place to continue to look for holes in those tools and in your environment. Reason be it is your environment changes all the time. One of the toughest, I want to say, processes to manage are change management, making sure that people don't plug in devices without going through the normal process, that patching is taking place on a regular basis, software is not being downloaded. These are areas of high risk. So even though you may think that you have a good handle on your environment and you have all the protection means in place, security risks evolve over time. Something that wasn't risky 6 months ago, today there is an exploit and somebody is able to exploit it. Then what was secure 6 months ago or 6 days ago even is no longer secure. So what do you do to make sure that you're proactively trying to detect what's going on in your environment? Vulnerability management and scanning on a regular basis, not once a year, more frequent than that, and then compare before and after and make informed decisions about what should you do. Gives you a lot of information about moving assets, protecting assets, changing your network architecture, or simply just patching your resources adequately. Make sure your antivirus, firewall, intrusion prevention have some audit mechanism to look at the logs. All these tools generate a lot of data to the point of it could be a noise, essentially, if you look at all of it and then it doesn't make sense. But if you have tools that are designed to alert you when some things are happening repeatedly or they're abnormal, then you're able to be more aware of, okay, something needs to be done, and like Roy mentioned as well, that some people have already been hacked and they're basically unaware of that. People, they try to hack your environment to use it as a platform to start penetrating other areas, and suddenly you become the launching board for an attack that you're completely unaware of. So the detection is something critical as one of the cogs in that wheel, if you will, of making sure that you are managing your risk effectively. Having a playbook ready is another, let's say that you are a healthcare provider and you discovered today that data was lost and somebody has either lost a laptop that has a lot of patients' data on it, or you were hacked somehow and remotely somebody was able to penetrate your environment. You really cannot make a decision on the spot on what to do. It would be nice to have that playbook ready in hand beforehand that says, if and when this were to occur, so-and-so needs to, I don't know, send a letter to the patient, inform the employees about this incident happening. Perhaps you need to inform the authorities if it's a new hack and it's something that penetrates your environment. You want to reach out, especially some regulations actually require you to do that. You inform the authorities if this happened today. All that needs to be in some sort of a policy of an incident response book, however you want to call it, but you need to be prepared that when it happens, you already have that playbook ready and you don't make decisions on the fly. It will help you to coordinate with stakeholders and make really thoughtful decisions about, okay, what do I do now and how am I going to recover? What are my plans for recovery? And then you execute the playbook, what you had decided before. It is really, most regulations and industry standards require you to do that, and it's also good business and good practice where you can execute whatever the actions you want to take. If you know that this one server was hacked, then how about taking it offline and making sure that it doesn't continue to be a source of an exploit for other assets in your environment or outside your environment. Whatever you do, do not erase that asset and make sure it's there for forensic purposes. So responding and preparing a response ahead of time is critical. And then the recovery, which is also something that requires prior planning. You want to plan for what-if scenario. What if my website, that is my e-commerce site, that is very critical for my business, were to be compromised, and how soon can I recover? Who's going to help me with the recovery? Do I have a data center available? Do I have the procedures to restart all over? Do I have backups for my data to restore from? You know, the WannaCry, the latest ransomware incidents that we're hearing about in the news, target your data and encrypt your data in a way that you can't even reuse that data without paying a ransom. Well, it would be really nice if you have a backup that is clean and very current, as current as possible, somewhere else where your backup data is not encrypted and not subject to the ransomware. That way you can restore. So these things you need to have a plan for in advance. And of course, after an incident happens, it's always an eye-opener for what steps were missed and what processes were not in place and how to improve. So lessons learned is key to use and reincorporate into the playbook that you had already put in place. And then you update that. So as you see, it's a chain reaction, and every process relies on the process before it and feeds into the next step in the process. So as we said, this is a continuous process. We advise that people patch on a regular basis, scan on a regular basis. As you see, we didn't talk here about the tools per se, you know, what antivirus to use and what type of firewall and what policy to put in place. That's definitely a subject for a different conversation. The point is, of at least this webinar today, is to talk about the big picture and tying your risk to your business practices, to your policies, and to see how that all fit together within an effective framework, where you identify your risks and you have protection in place, you have ongoing detection, you have a plan for response, and you have a plan for recovery, and then you're in business. When we were preparing this deck, we were thinking about what the challenge is for everybody is, okay, that's a huge elephant, and how do we tackle this big problem? The point, hopefully, that we made that came clear is that you start small, you pick your highest risk areas, you make decisions about those areas, and you can mature the program on an ongoing basis as you proceed. It does not need to be immediately fully comprehensive. But it certainly would be good to have a plan for the highest risk areas, make a decision about that, and then as you perfect these areas, you proceed to go down the line and make decisions about other risks. So the point is, one bite at a time. It seems as a big undertaking, it is, but it's definitely something that will protect your business and really at the end of the day make you successful, profitable, and helps you manage your risk effectively. That was the last slide. Roy, anybody has questions for us? Or?
Yeah, what I'm going to do, first of all, is tell everyone on the call, if you look at the left-hand side of that screen over there where you are, shows you as a participant, if you click that down arrow and it says chat, if you have any questions, just go to chat and send me your, type in your question, then I can address it. There's a couple things here that I was going to pose to Baan. If you guys are thinking about anything that you want to ask. So, Baan, in your experience, when you're working with companies, what are some of the major mistakes or omissions that business leaders are making today related to security? Are you seeing any kind of high-level patterns of behavior that you can, you know, tell people about and maybe how to start to wrap their hands around those things?
Yeah, actually, I think at a very high level, it is critical that top management has a clear, vocal commitment to managing risk. And that this risk management is not isolated into your IT security department or your security department. The point is the culture starts from the top, and in our experience, if the decision makers have a strong buy-in into the need for this type of program, they advocate for that on an ongoing basis where the message is very clear to everybody that this matters, then you will see that the culture changes and the behavior changes within the organization. And the point that we cannot make it strong enough is that every person is in essence a protection for and responsible officer for protecting your data and protecting your business. You're only as strong as your weakest link, and if you have a contractor that you haven't communicated to your priorities and haven't communicated to your requirements for risk management and protections, then that becomes your weakest link, and it doesn't matter how strong your policies are in-house, you will be, you know, your weakness is through that partner, like we use the Target example. But I can't say enough that the management needs to really forcefully make that clear and it becomes clear from their budget priorities and their spending priorities, their staffing and their communication, and engaging all stakeholders. We talked about the RACI. That needs to be clear that, you know, you engage your finance, your HR, your developers, your marketing folks, whomever is within your organization. They all need to be engaged in that process, and they need to all have a stake in making sure that this is implemented on an ongoing basis. The problem becomes when it's sort of it's a pain, but we have to do it, and we're only doing it because it's a regulatory requirement. So yeah, as soon as we finish check that block, let's move on and forget about it for the next year. That's where the issues become, you know, harder to manage and more involved, that it gets harder to mitigate even.
So do you see business leaders still looking at this as an IT issue versus a management or a risk management issue?
I want to say yes, not because business leaders are not aware. It's because they're overwhelmed and it's too much to tackle and they're very busy. So then guess what? It does take the backseat to other priorities. So resetting priorities in the sense of making it integrated into the decision-making, changing the approach to it. So like we suggested, going at it at one step at a time, making sure you're aware at least of what your risks are. That way you know, okay, what do I need to do? I don't think the leaders are not aware. It's just that there's so inundated, and like I said, the whole elephant thing, where do I begin? I might as well just not do anything, or just check the block and move on and hope nothing happens.
So are you seeing business leaders increasing their security budgets, and are there any patterns that you're seeing in terms of the percent of budgets that are being applied to security in general, cybersecurity specifically?
I don't think I can give statistics per se. I think, we deal with government clients a lot, so the government has a priority on that, and there's always a percentage of budget allocated to the compliance at least. But I can say that I don't believe that the budgets are in line or aligned with the risk. They may be too little for what really the risks are, or just focus on, maybe an expensive firewall or really sophisticated forensic tools. And like I said, I believe that the low budget items might go a long way in protecting a lot of risk areas, more than fancy and complicated tools. But I unfortunately cannot give you an answer on statistics.
Yeah, just curious. Are you seeing, how would you frame what you're seeing with clients in terms of user behavior? Are people getting more conscious and aware of using email appropriately, not being scammed and phished, and not downloading software, from all kinds of crazy places and putting it on a corporate asset? Are you seeing that improving or staying the same?
I think there's a lot more awareness. I think the news makes it impossible not to be aware of this happening. But really, again, judging by the frequency of this occurring, I think there's a lot more work to be done. It is alarming that people still click on phishing emails. They were getting very sophisticated as well. If I receive an email from Bank of America that looks very legit. It has the same logos, the same touch and feel, and only because I think about this all the time, I would look at the header of the email and see where is it coming from, and that your usual user on a day-to-day basis may not think twice about that. I obviously receive emails from banks that I don't even have accounts in,
right.
And that's the telltale. But still, I think that it's still a big risk area. It's still a huge risk area.
Now, in your business, are you seeing more businesses focusing on the DFARS regulation, the Department of Defense DFARS regulations, or is that not an area that you're involved with yet?
We're involved in that area. We've actually been able to help a couple of clients in that space. I think now that the deadline is looming and it's December this year, we're getting more questions about it. But I don't know to what extent. I think small businesses, medium-sized businesses are very leery about the expenditure of how to prove and protect the data. It's not clear what the penalties are if you're not in compliance. So I think businesses are hedging their bets at this point, waiting to see what does that mean. That's from my experience. Others on the call maybe have a better experience, but that's how we see it from our end.
Yeah, I would agree. As we're talking to clients around the state, we're seeing a lot of hesitance to invest in this. They're not getting a lot of guidance out of DOD saying, we're going to bring the hammer down. Anecdotally, we're hearing that what DOD is going to do is require a information security plan as an attachment to any contract that goes into DOD going forward, to at least show you when a company says we're in compliance, it's more than just checking off a box when they're really not. They need to see at least an information security assurance plan that shows that people know what they're talking about, you know, in terms of information security compliance.
And that's not an easy task. I would tell you that, again, from the examples that we have, it's not clear. Again, the premise of the D4 obviously is to focus on the data. If you have government data in your environment, you need to protect it. Well, what does that security plan encompass? What are the boundaries that you need to focus on? If you don't have government data, or you have government data on only some assets, then you could only focus that on the assets that have the data. But if you have it all over your email and all your SharePoint drives and laptops and desktops, then you're in trouble. You need to have a security plan that encompasses everything in your environment. So again, that goes to, if you know where the risks are and focus, maybe you could make sure that your government data is housed in a couple of assets, and you can protect these to the best of your ability. And then that reduces your overhead in having to present a security plan that is overwhelmingly complicated and includes every laptop in your environment, right? But I don't think that thought process was put in place ahead of time, so it might be too late for some businesses, but it's not clear where does this security plan need to cover. That's the type of questions we're getting.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Well, listen, Bob, we're coming to a conclusion, so I'm going to take the presentation back here and do a quick summary and conclude.
Sure.
Oh, bear with me 1 second, folks, as I bring this slide back up. Thank you for your presentation. Really appreciate the information. We're very much aligned on this risk management piece. I see clients all the time, small businesses that haven't invested a lot in infrastructure, and they're still running PCs with, you know, with XP on it. They're not patching their servers, and they're just not doing the basics because of time. And the data point that you alluded to, which has been confirmed by multiple sources, is that smaller businesses that do get breached and suffer a severe cybersecurity attack, 60% of those businesses, 60%, do not recover at all as a business and end up going out of business. So this, you know, we're not trying to sell doom and gloom here as a state agency. What we're trying to tell folks is this is, you know, this is preventative. It's something that you have to do. For the folks online, you can go to this link and download a free self-assessment that we put together that will help you start to frame out where some of your holes are and where some of the gaps are, and some things that you might want to think about. And let me conclude by saying this. What we're trying to do with small businesses here is we're trying to find an affordable, simple way for you to begin this journey of becoming more cyber secure. You will never be 100% secure. Okay, nobody is. I just read a stat, you know, the other day that said just the United States Navy alone gets 100,000 hacks a minute at the Department of the Navy. So, you know, these things are getting through. You can never be 100% secure. So what we're proposing for you folks is, if you want some help, is that we can help you frame this risk point of view in terms of probability, impact, and outcomes. We're working with technical firms like Baan to be able to have them do an external vulnerability assessment, which means they get onto your systems and actually review activity that's going on the network, on the servers, on your machines, and find, you know, the low-hanging fruit in terms of what is open. We provide you then from there a gap analysis and help you understand how to protect the crown assets or the crown jewel assets of your business: intellectual property, supplier information, employer information, employee information, and things like that. And then finally, balancing this risk view and the technical gaps to be able to give you a priority approach to where you should spend your money. You, as Baan said, you can't eat the elephant all at one time. You have to take it one bite at a time. So you have to apply scarce resources to the most appropriate and the biggest challenge one at a time, and do this from a structured management point of view. So that brings us to a conclusion. We're going to sign off. If you have any questions, comments, or conclusions, always feel free to reach out. Go ahead and download that free assessment, and hopefully we'll have a chance to work with you guys again in the future. Thanks all for your attendance, and we are signing out. Goodbye.
Thank you.